The rain came down in sheets, blurring the streetlights into hazy orbs as I sprinted toward the bus stop, my sneakers slapping against the wet pavement. My backpack thudded against my spine, heavy with books and the weight of a day that had already gone wrong. I was too late. The taillights of the last bus glowed red in the distance, mocking me as they disappeared around the corner. I stood there, soaked and shivering, cursing under my breath. It was past 8, and the small college town of Ashwood, Massachusetts, was shutting down for the night. The campus was a 20-minute drive from my apartment, and with no car and no cash for a rideshare, I was stranded. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it, too frustrated to deal with anyone. That's when I heard the low hum of an engine pulling up behind me. "Elliot, what are you doing out here?" The voice was calm, familiar, cutting through the rain like a lifeline. I turned to see Professor Daniel Harper leaning out the window of his old, forest green Subaru. His dark hair was slightly mussed, his glasses fogging up from the warmth of the car. He was my literature professor, the one whose lectures on Whitman and Dickinson made me feel like words could rebuild the world. "Get in before you catch pneumonia." I hesitated, my breath visible in the chilly air. There was something about him, his quiet intensity, the way his eyes lingered a moment too long, that always made my pulse quicken. But I was freezing, and the idea of walking home in this storm was unbearable. "Thanks, Professor," I mumbled, climbing into the passenger seat. The car smelled like old books and coffee, and the heat blasting from the vents wrapped around me like a blanket. "Where do you live?" he asked, pulling back onto the road. His voice was steady, but there was a softness to it, like he was genuinely concerned. I gave him my address, a rundown apartment complex on the edge of town, and he nodded, his hands steady on the wheel. The wipers swished rhythmically, filling the silence between us. "I missed the bus," I said, feeling the need to explain. "Got held up in the library working on that paper for your class. Lost track of time." He glanced at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "The Whitman essay. You're one of the few who actually seem to care about it." I felt my cheeks warm, despite the cold. "Yeah. Well, your lectures make it hard not to care." I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth. They sounded too eager, too revealing. But he didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, because his smile widened just a fraction. The drive was quiet after that, the rain a steady drumbeat against the car. I stole glances at him, at the way his hands gripped the wheel, the faint stubble along his jaw. He was only in his early 30s, younger than most professors. But there was a weight to him, like he carried stories he hadn't told anyone. I wondered what they were. What made him choose this small-town college over somewhere bigger? Somewhere he could have been a star. When we pulled up to my apartment, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The building looked even shabbier in the dim streetlight, its peeling paint and cracked windows a stark contrast to the warmth of his car. I reached for the door handle, but something in me didn't want to leave. "Not yet. Thanks for the ride, Professor," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. "Daniel," he corrected, his eyes meeting mine. "You're not in my classroom now." My heart stuttered. "Daniel," I repeated, testing the name. It felt intimate, like crossing a line I hadn't known was there. "I owe you one." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Elliot. Just stay dry, okay?" But he didn't look away, and neither did I. The air between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I should have gotten out then. I should have said goodnight and walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Do you want to come in? Just for a coffee or something?" "Too. Ah, thank you." His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. And for a moment, I thought he'd say no. But then he turned off the engine. And the silence that followed was louder than the rain. "Okay," he said finally, his voice low. "Just for a coffee." We climbed the creaky stairs to my apartment, the fluorescent lights flickering in the hallway. My place was small, cluttered with books and secondhand furniture. But it was mine. I fumbled with the coffee maker, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to ignore the fact that my Professor Daniel was standing in my living room, looking at my bookshelf like it held the secrets of the universe. "You've got good taste," he said, picking up a worn copy of Leaves of Grass. "Whitman's always been a favorite of mine." "Mine too," I said, handing him a mug. Our fingers brushed, and I swear the room got smaller, the air thicker. He sat on my couch, and I sat across from him, the coffee table a flimsy barrier between us. We talked about books, about poetry, about the way words could say what we were too afraid to. The conversation flowed too easily, like we'd done this 100 times before. Hours passed, the coffee long gone, and I realized we weren't talking about literature anymore. We were talking about life, about dreams, about the things we kept hidden. "Do you ever feel like you're running from something?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know why I said it, it just slipped out. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "All the time," he said. "But sometimes, I wonder if I'm running towards something instead." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. I don't know who moved first, maybe it was me. Maybe it was him, but suddenly we were closer, the space between us vanishing. His hand brushed my cheek, and I froze, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. "Elliot," he said, his voice rough, like he was fighting himself. "We shouldn't." But we did. The kiss was tentative at first, like we were both testing the weight of what we were doing. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of coffee and something sharper, like regret. But then I leaned into it, and the hesitation burned away, replaced by a hunger that scared me as much as it thrilled me. We pulled back, breathing hard, our foreheads almost touching. Daniel's eyes were dark, conflicted, but he didn't move away. "This is a bad idea," he whispered, but his hand was still on my neck, his thumb brushing my jaw. "I know," I said, my voice unsteady. "But I don't care." That was the truth, raw and reckless. I'd spent my life playing it safe, hiding who I was, keeping my head down in a town that didn't always understand people like me. I'd grown up in Ashwood, where being openly gay was still a risk, where whispers followed you like shadows. But in that moment, with Daniel so close, I felt like I could finally breathe. He kissed me again, harder this time, and the world narrowed to the press of his body against mine. My hands found his shirt, tugging it free from his jeans, and he let out a low sound that sent a shiver through me. We stumbled toward my bedroom, the coffee mugs forgotten, the boundaries between student and professor dissolving with every step. Afterward, we lay tangled in my sheets, the room lit only by the faint glow of a street lamp filtering through the blinds. My head rested on his chest, his heartbeat steady under my ear. Neither of us spoke for a long time, as if words might shatter whatever this was. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Daniel said finally, his voice soft but heavy. "I'm your professor, Elliot. It's not just complicated. It's wrong." I propped myself up on one elbow, looking at him. His face was half-shadowed, but I could see the guilt etched into his features. "Do you regret it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "No," he said at last. "But that doesn't make it right." I wanted to argue, to tell him it didn't matter, that what we'd just done felt more real than anything I'd ever known. But the weight of his words settled over me, and I realized he was right. He was my professor. I was his student. The world outside my apartment wouldn't care about how we felt, it would only see the lines we'd crossed. "I should go," he said, sitting up. He started pulling on his clothes, his movements quick, almost mechanical. I wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, but the words stuck in my throat. "Will I see you again?" I asked instead, hating how small my voice sounded. He paused, his back to me. "In class," he said, not turning around. "We'll see each other in class." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I sat there in the dark, the silence pressing in, and wondered what I'd just lost. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my alarm, my body aching in ways that reminded me of him. I dragged myself to campus, my stomach twisting with nerves. His class was in an hour, and I didn't know how I'd face him. Would he look at me the same way? Would he pretend nothing had happened? The lecture hall was half full when I arrived, students murmuring over their laptops. Daniel was at the front, setting up his notes, his posture as composed as ever. But I noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes flicked toward the door when I walked in. Our gazes met for a split second, and then he looked away, his expression unreadable. I took my usual seat near the back, my heart pounding. He started the lecture, his voice steady as he discussed Song of Myself. But I barely heard a word. My mind was replaying last night, the feel of his hands, the sound of his voice, the way he'd looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. After class, I lingered, pretending to pack my bag slowly. Most of the students filed out, but I stayed, hoping for what? A sign, a conversation. He was erasing the whiteboard when he noticed me. "Elliot," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Did you have a question about the lecture?" I swallowed, my throat tight. "No. I wanted to make sure you're okay." He set the eraser down, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I'm fine," he said, but his eyes told a different story. "You should go. You've got other classes." I nodded, my chest aching, and left the room. The rest of the day passed in a blur, my thoughts consumed by him. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a text, but it stayed silent. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything: his touch, his words, the way he'd left. I wondered if I'd pushed him too far, if I'd misread something. But then I remembered the way he'd kissed me, like he'd been starving for it. And I knew it wasn't just me. The next few days were torture. In class, he was professional, distant, treating me like any other student. But I caught the way his eyes lingered when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his voice softened when he said my name. It was enough to keep me hoping, even though I knew I shouldn't. By the end of the week, I was a mess. I couldn't focus on my assignments, couldn't eat, couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. I started noticing things I hadn't before: how he'd avoid meeting my eyes during office hours, how he'd linger near my desk when passing out papers, like he was fighting himself every second we were in the same room. I needed to talk to him, to understand what was happening between us. So, on Friday, after his last class, I waited outside the English department building, my hands stuffed in my pockets to keep them from shaking. When he stepped out, his coat slung over one arm, he stopped short when he saw me. "Elliot," he said, his voice cautious. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "About the other night." He glanced around, like he was checking for witnesses. "Not here," he said quietly. "Let's walk." We ended up at a small park near campus, the kind of place where old couples fed pigeons and students studied under oak trees. It was late afternoon, the air crisp with the promise of fall. We sat on a bench, far enough apart to look casual, but close enough that I could feel the heat of him next to me. "I can't stop thinking about you," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I know it's complicated, but I don't care. I've never felt like this before." He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tight. "Elliot, you don't understand what you're asking. I'm your professor. If anyone found out, I could lose my job. You could get expelled. This isn't just about you, it's about the consequences." "Then why did you come to my apartment?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Why did you kiss me?" He flinched, like I'd hit him. "Because I'm human," he said, his voice raw. "Because I've been trying to ignore how I feel about you since the first day you walked into my class. But I can't do this. Elliot, I can't." I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, standing up. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never should have let it get this far." He walked away, leaving me on the bench, my heart in pieces. I sat there until the sun dipped below the horizon, trying to make sense of it all. I wanted to hate him for pulling back, but I couldn't. I saw the way he was tearing himself apart, caught between what he wanted and what he thought was right. The next week, I threw myself into my studies, trying to drown out the ache. But it didn't work. Every time I saw him in class, it was like a knife twisting in my chest. I started skipping lectures, telling myself it was better this way, but it only made me feel more lost. One night, I was at a campus bar with some friends, trying to distract myself with cheap beer and loud music. That's when I saw him, Daniel, sitting at the bar with another professor, laughing at something she said. He looked relaxed, like he'd moved on, like I was just a blip in his life. Jealousy burned through me, sharp and ugly. I left the bar, my head spinning, and walked aimlessly until I ended up at his office. It was late, the building mostly empty, but his light was on. I didn't think, I just knocked. He opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer when he saw me. "Elliot, what are you?" "I saw you at the bar," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "You looked happy, like you didn't care." He sighed, stepping aside to let me in. "It's not what you think," he said, closing the door behind us. "I was just trying to act normal, to pretend I'm not falling apart every time I see you." "Then stop pretending," I said, stepping closer. "If you feel something, don't push me away." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he'd kiss me again. But then he shook his head, stepping back. "I can't. Elliot, I won't risk your future." I left his office feeling like I'd lost him all over again. But as I walked home, I realized something. I wasn't going to give up. Not yet. I spent the next few weeks trying to move on, but it was like trying to outrun my own shadow. Daniel was everywhere in the lines of poetry I read, in the quiet moments when I was alone, in the way my heart raced every time I passed his office. I started going to class again, sitting in the back, keeping my head down. But I couldn't stop watching him. Couldn't stop hoping he'd look at me the way he had that night. One day, after a lecture on Emily Dickinson, he asked me to stay behind. My stomach knotted as the other students left, their chatter fading down the hall. He waited until we were alone, then handed me a stack of graded papers. "Your essay on Dickinson was exceptional," he said, his voice professional but warm. "You have a real gift for seeing the layers in her work." "Thanks," I said, my throat tight. I wanted to say more, to ask why he was still keeping me at arm's length, but I couldn't find the words. He hesitated, then said, "Elliot, I owe you an apology for how I've handled this. I never meant to hurt you." "Then why are you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You act like I'm just another student, but we both know that's not true." He looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "Because I have to," he said. "Because if I don't, I'll lose everything I've worked for. And so will you." I stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "What if I'm willing to risk it?" He shook his head, but his resolve was cracking. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his breath hitched. "You're too young to understand what you're saying," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "I'm not a kid," I said, my voice firm. "I know what I want. And I want you." For a moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then he closed the distance between us, his hands cupping my face as he kissed me. It was desperate, like he'd been holding back for too long. And I kissed him back with everything I had. We broke apart, both of us breathing hard. "This can't keep happening," he said, but he didn't let go of me. "Then let it happen once more," I whispered, and he didn't pull away. We started meeting in secret late nights in his office, quiet walks in parts of town where no one knew us. It was thrilling, but it was also exhausting. Always looking over our shoulders, always hiding. I hated the secrecy, but I loved him too much to care. One night, we were at his place, a small house on the outskirts of Ashwood. It was cozy, filled with books and records, the kind of place that felt like him. We were lying on his couch, my head in his lap as he read aloud from Leaves of Grass. His voice was low, soothing, and I felt like I could stay there forever. But then he stopped reading, his hand stilling in my hair. "Elliot," he said, his voice serious, "we need to talk about what we're doing." I sat up, my heart sinking. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this can't last," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Not like this. We're playing with fire, and someone's going to get burned." I wanted to argue, to tell him we could make it work. But deep down, I knew he was right. The secrecy was eating at us, turning something beautiful into something fraught with fear. But I wasn't ready to let go on it yet. The turning point came in late November, when the air turned sharp and the first snow dusted Ashwood streets. Daniel and I had been sneaking around for weeks, stealing moments whenever we could. But the weight of it was starting to show on him, in the way he'd tense when we heard footsteps outside his office. On me, in the way I'd lie awake at night, wondering how long we could keep this up. One evening, we were at a diner on the edge of town, a place too far from campus for anyone to recognize us. We sat in a corner booth, our knees touching under the table, sharing a plate of fries like we were just two people in love, not a professor and his student. But then I saw someone from my history class walk in, and I froze. "Relax," Daniel whispered, his hand brushing mine under the table. She didn't see us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on borrowed time. "What happens if someone finds out?" I asked, my voice low. "What happens to us?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at his coffee like it held the answers. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know I don't want to lose you." His words should have made me feel better, but they didn't. They only made me realize how fragile this was, how one wrong move could bring it all crashing down. The next day, I got an email from the dean's office. My heart stopped when I saw the subject line, "Meeting request." It was vague, formal, but it felt like a guillotine hanging over my head. I showed it to Daniel after class, my hands shaking as I handed him my phone. He read it, his face unreadable. "It's probably nothing," he said, but his voice was tight. "Just go to the meeting. Act normal." The meeting was the next morning, and I barely slept that night. When I walked into the dean's office, I expected to see Daniel there, but it was just me and Dean Whitaker, a stern woman with sharp eyes. She asked about my classes, my grades, my involvement on campus. It felt routine, but there was an edge to her questions, like she was fishing for something. "Is everything okay with your coursework, Elliot?" she asked, leaning forward. "Any concerns with your professors?" My mouth went dry. "No," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. When I left, my legs felt like jelly. I texted Daniel, telling him it went okay, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, I went to his house, needing to see him, needing to know we were still okay. He pulled me into his arms as soon as I walked in, kissing me like he was afraid I'd disappear. But when we pulled apart, his face was serious. "I got a call from the dean today," he said, his voice low. "She asked about my teaching methods, about how I interact with students. I think she suspects something." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" I told her the truth, that I'm committed to my students' success. "But Elliot," if she digs deeper, he trailed off, his hands tightening around mine. "We need to be more careful. Or we could stop hiding," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "We could be honest. Tell everyone. What's the worst that could happen?" He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "The worst? I lose my career. You lose your degree. We both lose everything we've worked for. But we'd have each other," I said, my voice shaking. "Isn't that worth it?" He didn't answer, just pulled me close, his arms a silent promise that we'd figure it out. But as I lay in his bed that night, listening to his breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Winter break was approaching, and with it, a chance to breathe. Daniel and I planned to spend it together, away from Ashwood, where we could be ourselves without fear. We booked a cabin in Vermont, a secluded place where no one would know us. It felt like a lifeline, a chance to hold on to what we had. But the week before break, everything unraveled. I was in the library, working on a final paper, when I overheard two students whispering at the next table. "Did you hear about Professor Harper?" One said. "They're saying he's too close with a student." My blood ran cold. I kept my head down, pretending to type, but my hands were shaking. The rumors were starting, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they reached the dean. I went straight to Daniel's office, my heart pounding. He was grading papers, his glasses perched on his nose. But he stood up when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, closing the door behind me. "They're talking about us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "In the library. People know." He cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "Okay," he said, his voice steady despite the panic in his eyes. "We need to stop. No more meetings. No more late nights. Not until this blows over." "Stop," I echoed, my chest tightening. "You mean break up?" "No," he said quickly, stepping closer. "I mean we need to be smart. We need to protect ourselves." But it didn't feel like protection, it felt like he was pulling away again. I left his office, my eyes burning with unshed tears, and went home. That night, I got a text from him. "I'm sorry. I just need time to figure this out." Time. It was the one thing we didn't have. The rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by half-truths and speculation. By the end of the week, I was getting sidelong glances from classmates, whispers following me down the halls. I stopped going to Daniel's class, telling myself it was to protect him. But really, I couldn't bear to see him pretend I was just another student. The day before break, I got another email from the dean. This time, it wasn't vague. It requested a meeting with both me and Daniel, scheduled for the first day back. My stomach churned as I read it, knowing what it meant. They knew. Or at least, they suspected enough to investigate. I called Daniel, my hands shaking as I held the phone. "They want us both," I said when he picked up. "What do we do?" He was silent for a long moment. "We tell the truth," he said finally. "But not everything. We admit we're close, but we deny anything inappropriate. It's the only way." I hated the plan, hated the idea of lying about what we felt. But I agreed, because I didn't know what else to do. The cabin in Vermont was supposed to be our escape, but it felt like a last stand. We drove up in silence, the weight of the meeting hanging over us. The cabin was beautiful snow-covered pines, a frozen lake, a fire crackling in the hearth. But we couldn't relax, couldn't pretend everything was okay. One night, as we sat by the fire, Daniel took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. "If this goes wrong," he said, his voice low, "I want you to know that I love you." It was the first time he'd said it, and it hit me like a tidal wave. "I love you too," I said, my voice breaking. "No matter what happens." We held each other that night, the firelight casting shadows on the walls, and I prayed it wouldn't be the last time. The meeting with the dean was a blur of cold formality. Dean Whitaker sat across from us, her hands folded on her desk, her eyes sharp as she asked about our relationship. Daniel took the lead, his voice calm as he explained that we'd become friends, that he'd given me a ride home one night, that our interactions were always professional. I nodded along, my heart pounding, hating every lie that came out of his mouth. She didn't believe us, I could see it in her face. But she didn't have proof. Not yet. "We take these matters seriously," she said. "If there's even a hint of impropriety, there will be consequences." We left the meeting shaken but intact, at least for now. Daniel walked me to my apartment, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "We need to stop seeing each other," he said when we reached my door. For real this time. I wanted to argue, to beg him to reconsider, but I was too tired. "Okay," I said, my voice hollow. "If that's what you want." It's not what I want, he said, his voice breaking. It's what we have to do. He left, and I didn't see him again until the spring semester started. He was still my professor, but it was different now. He didn't call on me in class, didn't meet my eyes. I felt like a ghost, invisible to the one person who'd made me feel seen. I tried to move on, throwing myself into my studies, my friends, anything to fill the void. But nothing worked. Every poem we read in class, every lecture on love and longing, felt like a knife in my chest. I started questioning everything, whether he'd ever really loved me, whether I'd been a fool to think we could make it work. One day, I found a note slipped under my apartment door. It was in Daniel's handwriting, simple and unsigned. Meet me at the park. Midnight. My heart raced as I read it. I knew I should ignore it. Knew it was a risk. But I couldn't stay away. When I got to the park, he was there, sitting on the same bench where we'd talked months ago. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed. But when he saw me, he smiled a real smile. Not the guarded one he'd been wearing in class. I can't do this anymore, he said, standing up. I can't pretend I don't love you. I froze, my breath catching. What about the consequences? I'll deal with them, he said, stepping closer. I've already talked to the department chair. I'm resigning at the end of the semester. My eyes widened. Daniel. No. You can't. I can, he said, his voice firm. I've spent my life playing by the rules, hiding who I am. I'm done with that. I want to be with you, Elliot. Out in the open. Tears stung my eyes as I reached for him. And this time, he didn't pull away. We kissed under the stars, the world quiet around us. And for the first time, I felt like we had a future. The rest of the semester was a whirlwind. Daniel's resignation wasn't public yet, but the rumors had died down, replaced by the usual campus gossip. We were careful, meeting only off campus, keeping our distance in public. But every stolen moment felt like a victory, a step toward a life where we didn't have to hide. When the semester ended, Daniel moved to Boston, taking a job at a small publishing house. I stayed in Ashwood to finish my degree, but we talked every day, our love growing stronger despite the distance. I visited him on weekends, and we'd walk through the city, holding hands without fear, something I'd never thought possible in Ashwood. Graduation came, and Daniel was there, sitting in the audience, his smile brighter than the sun. After the ceremony, we drove to the coast, to a little beach house he'd rented for the summer. We stood on the shore, the waves crashing at our feet, and I felt like I was finally free. I missed the bus that night, I said, leaning against him. And I'm so glad I did. He laughed, pulling me close. Me too, he said. It was worth every risk. We stayed there for hours, talking about the future, about moving in together, about building a life where we could be ourselves. It wouldn't be easy, not in a world that still judged people like us, but we were ready to face it together. Looking back, I realized that night at the bus stop had changed everything. It wasn't just about missing a visit, it was about finding the courage to love, to fight for what mattered, no matter the cost. We'd crossed lines, broken rules, but in doing so, we'd found something worth more than any degree or job, each other. And as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I knew we'd made it through the storm. Together, we'd found our way home.